A wild bobcat kitten, alone, furious, and barely old enough to stand, was brought into a rescue center, too young to survive without his mother. But Caroline had one last wild idea. Introduce him to Snowflake, a 12-pound ball of white fluff who had never seen the wild, never hunted a day in her life. And her greatest achievement was once chasing a dust bunny under the couch. But when the carrier door opened and the kitten emerged, something happened no one expected. Trust was born. And over the weeks that followed, this unlikely duo would form a bond that defied nature itself. Could a housecat actually raise a creature born to hunt, climb, and survive in the Colorado wilderness? This is the extraordinary true story of an impossible foster family, where purrs bridged species, love transcended nature, and one tiny bobcat learned that sometimes the wildest lesson of all is learning to trust. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The morning Caroline Thompson got the call about the orphaned bobcat kitten, she was already elbow deep in what she liked to call Tuesday's special. A raccoon with an attitude problem, 2 possums who'd gotten into someone's garage sale, and a screech owl that had apparently mistaken a wind chime for a romantic rival. "Caroline, we've got a situation." Sheriff Martinez's voice crackled through her phone, which she'd wedged between her shoulder and ear while trying to convince the smaller possum that the vintage hat collection was not, in fact, a buffet. "Unless it's on fire or actively eating someone, it'll have to wait," Caroline muttered, finally extracting a pearl-buttoned pillbox hat from the possum's surprisingly strong grip. "It's a bobcat kitten. Maybe 5-6 weeks old. Mama's been hit on Route 47. Caroline froze. In her 23 years running Spicy Cat's Wildlife Rescue just outside of Boulder, Colorado, she'd handled everything from mountain lions to house cats who thought they were mountain lions. But a bobcat kitten that young without its mother? That was like trying to raise a tornado in a teacup, theoretically possible, practically insane. "Bring it in," she said, already mentally rearranging her day, her week, probably her entire spring. 2 hours later, Sheriff Martinez arrived with a cardboard box that seemed to be vibrating with pure, concentrated panic. Inside was the tiniest, angriest ball of spotted fur Caroline had ever seen. The kitten couldn't have weighed more than 2 pounds, but it was hissing like it intended to take on the entire world and possibly win. "Well, aren't you just a ray of sunshine?" Caroline murmured, pulling on her thick leather gloves. The kitten responded by attempting to eat her thumb through the glove. "Okay, tough guy. Let's get you checked out." The veterinary exam revealed what Caroline had feared. The kitten was dehydrated, underweight, and desperately in need of round-the-clock care. At this age, he should still be nursing, learning the basics of being a bobcat from his mother. Without that crucial bonding and those early lessons, his chances of survival, let alone eventual release back to the wild, were slim. That's when Caroline had what her assistant Jake would later call the kind of idea that either wins you a Nobel Prize or gets you a reality TV show. Snowflake was, by any reasonable measure, the least likely candidate for wildlife fostering in the entire state of Colorado. The 12-pound, snow-white, long-haired housecat, so fluffy she looked dipped in fresh snow, had arrived at Spicy Cat's 3 years earlier when her elderly owner had passed away, leaving behind a cat who considered anything more strenuous than a gentle stretch to be manual labor. Snowflake's greatest hunting achievement was once cornering a dust bunny, and even then, she'd called for backup. But Snowflake had one remarkable quality. She was, without question, the most maternal creature Caroline had ever encountered. She'd mothered orphaned kittens, sure, but also puppies, baby rabbits, and once, memorably, a particularly anxious chicken. If it was small and needed comfort, Snowflake was there with a purr and a grooming session that could last hours. "This is either brilliant or the worst idea I've ever had," Caroline told Jake as they prepared the introduction room. A quiet space with soft blankets, hidden cameras for monitoring, and multiple escape routes in case things went catastrophically wrong. "Remember when you tried to teach that raccoon to use the toilet?" Jake reminded her. "That was different. That was ambitious. This is..." Caroline paused, watching Snowflake waddle into the room with all the urgency of a sloth on vacation. "This is necessary." The Bobcat kitten was in his carrier in the corner, having exhausted himself with an hour-long protest that had included hissing, spitting, and what Caroline could only describe as attempted swearing in Bobcat. The plan was simple. Let Snowflake investigate at her own pace, intervene if necessary, and pray to whatever deity watched over insane wildlife rehabbers. Snowflake approached the carrier with the kind of casual interest she usually reserved for empty food bowls. Curious, but not particularly invested. She sniffed once, twice. The kitten, perhaps sensing a presence that wasn't trying to examine him or give him medicine, went quiet. What happened next would become legend at Spicy Cat's rescue, told and retold at every volunteer orientation for years to come. Snowflake sat down, looked at the carrier, and began to purr. Not just any purr. This was what the staff called her maternal override purr, a sound that could probably calm a hurricane if hurricanes had ears. The kitten, who 5 minutes earlier had been ready to fight God himself, made a tiny, questioning mew. Caroline held her breath as she slowly, carefully opened the carrier door. The kitten emerged like a very small, very confused soldier emerging from a bunker after a ceasefire. His oversized paws, those magnificent snowshoe paws that would one day carry him through Colorado winters, trembled slightly. His tufted ears, still too big for his head, swiveled like radar dishes trying to locate the source of that impossibly soothing sound. Snowflake, meanwhile, had shifted into what Jake called loaf mode. Paws tucked under, looking like a snow roll. She watched the kitten with half-lidded eyes, purring steadily. The kitten took one step, then another. His little spotted body was tense, ready to bolt. But something about Snowflake's complete lack of concern seemed to confuse his wild instincts. This creature wasn't afraid of him. It wasn't trying to catch him. It was just there, warm, soft purring. When the kitten finally reached Snowflake, he did what any confused orphaned baby would do. He headbutted her gently, the universal cat gesture for, "I'm scared and you seem nice." Snowflake's response was immediate and decisive. She began grooming him. "Holy mother of pearl," Jake whispered from where they watched on the monitor. "She's actually doing it." The kitten went rigid for a moment, probably having his tiny mind blown by the sensation of a tongue that wasn't his mother's but felt right anyway. Then, miracle of miracles, he began to purr. It was a rusty, uncertain sound, like an engine that hadn't been started in a while, but it was definitely a purr. Within 10 minutes, the Bobcat kitten was attempting to nurse. Snowflake, who obviously couldn't provide milk, simply adjusted herself to let him try, occasionally licking his head as if to say, There, tiny wildling. We'll figure this out." Caroline had to bottle feed him, of course, but she quickly learned to do it while he was cuddled against Snowflake. The Housecat would purr throughout the feeding, one paw gently resting on the kitten as if to say, "This is my baby, but you can help." The next few weeks were, as Caroline would later describe them to a documentary crew, like watching a Disney movie directed by someone with a very weird sense of humor. The kitten, whom the staff started calling Trouble, because naming him anything else would have been false advertising, decided that Snowflake was not just his mother but his entire universe. He followed her everywhere, which led to some genuinely hilarious situations. There was the time Snowflake decided to use the litter box, only to find Trouble attempting to squeeze in with her, apparently convinced that this was a group activity. Snowflake's expression of long-suffering patience as she tried to maintain dignity while a Bobcat kitten tried to help her bury her business became the screensaver on every computer at the rescue. Then there was Trouble's first encounter with Snowflake's favorite toy, a feather wand that she liked to bat at occasionally when she felt particularly energetic, roughly once a month. Trouble attacked it with the intensity of a kitten who believed this feather had personally insulted his ancestors. Snowflake watched from her cushion, occasionally lifting one paw as if to say, "That's nice, dear." The food situation was particularly entertaining. Snowflake had always been a delicate eater, taking small, refined bites of her premium senior cat food. Trouble approached his bottle like it owed him money, and when Caroline started introducing him to solid food, the specially prepared raw diet necessary for a growing bobcat, he attacked it with gusto that splattered bits of meat up to 3 feet away. Snowflake would fastidiously clean her whiskers after every meal while Trouble looked like he'd been in a food fight and lost. But it wasn't all comedy gold. There were moments that made Caroline's chest ache with their sweetness. Like the thunderstorm night when Trouble, who in the wild would have been fearless, trembled against Snowflake while she wrapped herself around him, purring loud enough to drown out the thunder. Or the morning Caroline found them grooming each other, Trouble's rough little tongue working carefully around Snowflake's ears while she cleaned his spotted coat until it shone. The real magic, though, was in what Snowflake was teaching him without meaning to. She was showing him that the world could be safe, that touch could be gentle, that not every large creature was a threat. These weren't lessons a wild bobcat mother would teach. They were potentially dangerous lessons for a wild animal. But they were keeping him alive, helping him grow strong enough to eventually learn the real lessons he'd need. Jake started a video series called Snowflake School for Wayward Wildcats, which became an unexpected viral sensation. Millions watched as Snowflake taught Trouble her version of important life skills. Lesson 1. The art of the nap. Trouble, genetically programmed to be crepuscular, most active at dawn and dusk, tried to resist Snowflake's strict napping schedule. She simply sat on him until he gave up and discovered that afternoon naps were actually pretty great. Lesson 2. Dignified grooming. Trouble's initial grooming attempts looked like he was trying to remove his own fur with prejudice. Snowflake patiently demonstrated proper technique, though Trouble's version still looked more like barely controlled chaos. Lesson 3. The power of the purr. This was perhaps the most successful lesson. Trouble developed a purr that could probably register on seismic equipment. He purred while eating, while playing, while sleeping, and once, memorably, while Caroline was trying to give him medicine, which made the whole process significantly more difficult but infinitely more adorable. But as Trouble grew, and boy, did he grow, reality began creeping in. At 12 weeks, he was already nearly as big as Snowflake. His paws, once comically oversized, were now fitting his body, and those paws had claws that could do serious damage. His play was getting rougher, though he was remarkably gentle with Snowflake, seeming to understand that she was fragile in a way he wasn't. The call from Millstone Wildlife Rehabilitation Center came on a Tuesday that felt too much like a Monday. "We've got space for your bobcat," Director Williams said. "Tom Bradford's ready to take him on." Tom Bradford was a legend in wildlife rehabilitation circles. a man who'd successfully returned more bobcats to the wild than anyone else in the country. If anyone could teach Trouble how to be a wild bobcat, it was Tom. His facility in the mountains had enormous enclosures, live prey training programs, and most importantly, other bobcats who could teach Trouble the things Snowflake, for all her love, simply couldn't. Caroline knew this was always the plan. The whole point was to save Trouble's life so he could return to the wild where he belonged. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your gut are two very different things. She broke the news to her staff at the morning meeting. Jake immediately excused himself, claiming he had something in his eye. Both eyes. Simultaneously. The volunteer coordinator, Margaret, a tough-as-nails 70-year-old who'd seen everything, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "When?" Margaret asked. "Friday," Caroline said. "Tom wants to start the transition before he gets too much older." They all looked through the window to where Trouble and Snowflake were engaged in their morning routine. Trouble was attempting to catch dust motes while Snowflake supervised from her cushion, occasionally offering what looked like coaching via tail twitch. "Does Snowflake know?" Jake asked, which was ridiculous but also exactly what they were all thinking. The Thursday before Trouble's departure, Caroline swore Snowflake knew. Snowflake spent extra time grooming him, even letting him hunt her tail, something she usually only tolerated for a few seconds. That evening, instead of retiring to her separate sleeping area as she usually did, because even the most patient mother needs a break, she curled up with Trouble in his den. Caroline found them there Friday morning. Trouble sprawled across Snowflake like a spotted blanket, both of them purring in harmony. She took approximately 300 photos before she could bring herself to start the separation process. The transport carrier, much larger than the one Trouble had arrived in, sat ready. Caroline had put one of Snowflake's favorite blankets inside, hoping it might comfort him during the journey. "Okay, Trouble," she said, her voice only cracking a little. "Time for the next adventure." Trouble, now nearly 15 pounds of muscle and spotted fur, looked at her with those green gold eyes that still held a hint of Kitten. He walked into the carrier without fuss. Snowflake had taught him that carriers weren't scary, another lesson that would need to be unlearned. Snowflake followed them to the door, her usual waddle a bit more purposeful than normal. As Caroline loaded the carrier into the van, Snowflake did something she'd never done before. She meowed. Once. Clear and deliberate. Trouble answered with a chirping sound that bobcats make, a sound he'd never made before at the rescue. "I know, Mama," Caroline whispered to Snowflake. "You did so good. You saved him." The drive to Millstone took 3 hours. Caroline spent most of it telling Trouble about where he was going, about the mountains and the forests, and the life that was waiting for him. He spent most of it asleep, occasionally purring in his dreams. Tom Bradford was everything Caroline had hoped: competent, compassionate, and completely committed to Trouble's successful rehabilitation. The facility was stunning, with enclosures that looked like pieces of wilderness had been carefully transplanted. "He's beautiful," Tom said, looking at Trouble, who was now alert and watching everything with intense interest. "And bigger than I expected. You did good work." "Snowflake did the work," Caroline corrected. "I just provided the bottles." Tom smiled. "I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never heard of a housecat successfully fostering a bobcat. You've got something special there." As they transferred Trouble to his new enclosure, a transition space where he could acclimate before meeting the other bobcats, Caroline gave him one last scratch behind the ears. He leaned into it, purring. "You're going to be wild," she told him, You're going to hunt and climb and find a territory and maybe even have kittens of your own someday. But right now, just for a minute, you can be Snowflake's baby. 6 months later, Caroline got the call she'd been both dreading and hoping for. "He's ready," Tom said simply. "Release is scheduled for next week. You should come." Caroline brought Snowflake's blanket with her, not to give to trouble, but as her own comfort. The release site was gorgeous, a protected area with plenty of prey, water sources, and no nearby highways. Trouble, though Tom had taken to calling him by his official designation, M847, had exceeded all expectations. He could hunt, climb, and most importantly, he was appropriately wary of humans. "He still purrs sometimes," Tom mentioned as they prepared the release. "When he's alone, thinking no one's watching. Never seen that in a rehab before?" Caroline smiled through her tears. Snowflake's lasting influence. The release itself was anticlimactic in the best way. The transport crate opened, and Trouble, wild now, truly wild, stepped out cautiously. He sniffed the air, those tufted ears swiveling to catch every sound. Then, without a backward glance, he melted into the forest like smoke. "That's perfect," Tom said. "No hesitation, no looking back. He's going to make it." Caroline drove home feeling empty and full at the same time. When she arrived at Spicy Cat's, she found Snowflake in her usual spot, surrounded by the new arrivals. 3 orphaned raccoon kits who'd been brought in that morning. "Don't even think about it," Caroline told her, but Snowflake was already purring, one paw gently touching the smallest kit. Jake appeared beside her. "You know she's going to adopt them all." "I know," Caroline sighed, then smiled. "That's what she does." 2 years later, Caroline received a photograph from a trail camera in Trouble's release area. It showed a magnificent adult bobcat, powerful and healthy, moving through the snow with those distinctive snowshoe paws. But what made Caroline's heart skip was the small detail Tom had circled in red ink. The bobcat was purring as it walked, visible as small puffs of breath in the cold air. She showed the photo to Snowflake, who was busy with her latest project, a squirrel kit whose mother had been hit by a car. "Look what you did," Caroline told her. "You saved a wild thing by teaching him to be gentle first." Snowflake glanced at the photo, then went back to grooming the squirrel, who was already starting to purr, even though squirrels don't purr. But in Snowflake's world, Caroline had learned anything was possible. Love was a language that crossed species. Dignity could be maintained even while being tackled by infants of any kind. And sometimes, just sometimes, a housecat who thought hunting meant waiting by the food bowl could teach a wild bobcat everything he needed to know about being loved. The squirrel kit chirped contentedly. Snowflake purred like a diesel engine. And somewhere in the Colorado mountains, a bobcat moved through his territory with the confidence of a creature who knew, deep in his bones, that the world could be kind. Because once, in a rescue center that smelled like disinfectant and hope, a housecat named Snowflake had taught him so.